My name is Owen, and I'm 49 years old. I've spent the last 24 years married to Carol, my wife who just turned 51. Carol is everything you'd expect of a university professor, sharp, driven, and passionate about her work. When we met, I was the one with big dreams but empty pockets, hustling day and night to build something out of nothing. Carol stood by me, as steady as the sun, while I turned my small bakery into a thriving chain. Carol was also at the beginning of her career path. You know, being a teacher is also difficult and costly. So when I was doing better, I supported my wife financially and emotionally so that she could grow into a professor. Now it seemed that our dreams had been realized and we could relax and reap the rewards. We live in a quiet suburb in New Jersey. It's a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, but not too well. Our two-story colonial has the kind of charm you can't put a price on, probably because it's soaked in years of love and memories. At least, that's how I used to feel. Lately, though, something has shifted. Our marriage, once so comfortable, now feels like a worn-out sweater. Familiar, but not quite right. Carol and I have always been busy people. I'm up before dawn most mornings to supervise the bakeries. She's often out the door not long after, heading to the university where she teaches. But over the past few months, we've started moving like two trains on separate tracks. By the time I come home, exhausted and smelling like flour, she's either at a late meeting or locked in her home office. It wasn't just her absence. It was the subtle changes. The bright-colored blouses she started wearing, ones that clung to her figure in a way I hadn't seen in years. At first, I thought nothing of it. People can reinvent themselves, right? But then there were the excuses. They're just informal faculty meetings, she'd say when I asked about her late-night returns. Sometimes we unwind at a casual spot after work. You don't want me to be that uptight professor everyone avoids, do you? Her laugh was light, but her eyes darted, like she was already prepared for my question. The first time I noticed her outfit, I teased her. That's a bit fancy for grading papers, isn't it? She smiled. You know how it is, Owen. Gotta keep up with the younger crowd. She kissed my cheek and breezed past me like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I didn't want to believe it. Still don't, really. But something gnawed at me. A quiet whisper in the back of my mind. It told me to start looking closer. I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. Betrayal was something I thought belonged in other people's lives, not ours. Carol and I had built something strong. Or so I believed. We had raised 2 children and weathered more than our fair share of storms. Sarah, our daughter, now 21, was halfway across the world in Japan, pursuing her dream of becoming a Japanese language specialist. She had worked so hard to land that internship, and I was proud of her every day. Then there was William. At 25, he was living on his own, building his life in another city. William wasn't our biological son. He was my sister's. When she and her husband died in a car accident, Carol and I stepped in, raising him as our own. It wasn't always easy, especially during those teenage years, but we managed. When I look back now, I realize that life is a lot like sailing at sea. You can think the waters are calm, steady, and safe, and yet the storm clouds are gathering just over the horizon, out of sight. That morning felt like one of those calm seas, the kind where you'd never expect anything to go wrong. I was enjoying a rare day off, something I seldom allowed myself. My bakeries ran like a well-oiled machine most days, but I'd taken the time to relax for once. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. Sarah was abroad, William busy with work, and Carol had left for the university about 15 minutes earlier. I sat on the couch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, savoring the rare peace. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting warm patterns across the room. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything in my life was just as it should be. But looking back, I realized there were signs, a distance between Carol and me that I ignored, small moments I dismissed as nothing, like the subtle shift in her wardrobe or the way her laugh seemed forced when I asked about her late-night meetings. Little things, like the breeze that brushes your face before the winds of a storm pick up speed. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, thinking of all the challenges we had overcome. Surely, if we could make it through all that, Nothing could touch us now. Then came the knock on the door. It startled me, snapping me out of my thoughts. In our quiet suburb, visitors were rare, especially on a weekday morning. I set my coffee down and stood, feeling a faint flicker of unease. Who could it be? A neighbor? Someone selling something? I walked to the door, my hand hesitating on the handle. It was such an ordinary thing, a knock at the door. But why did it feel like something was about to change? As I reached for the handle, I couldn't help but think of the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, unseen until it's too late. When I opened the door, I was met by a woman I didn't recognize. She looked to be in her early 40s, maybe 5 years younger than me. Her outfit was simple, a blouse and jeans, but her face was what caught my attention. Nervous, pale, and exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. It was the kind of look people wear when they're hanging on by a thread. For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips slightly parted as if trying to form words. My eyes drifted to her hands, and I froze. She was holding a small pepper spray, the kind you'd normally use in self-defense. Immediately, my guard went up. Who was this woman? What did she want? My heart started racing, though I tried to stay calm. She must have noticed my reaction because she quickly stuffed the pepper spray into her purse, her movements jerky and awkward. She began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I think I might have the wrong address. I stood there speechless for a moment. My first instinct was to end the encounter right then and there, close the door and lock it. She looked stressed, maybe unwell, and a part of me worried this might be some unhinged stranger. But then, something in her eyes stopped me. There was fear there, yes, but also desperation. Did you want something? I asked, breaking the heavy silence. She fumbled with her words. No, I mean, yes. I think I made a mistake. I was looking for someone, but who? I asked cautiously. Were you looking for someone in particular? She shifted on her feet, clearly uneasy. Yes, I was looking for Carol, but I must be mistaken. Hearing my wife's name sent a cold wave through me. This wasn't some random encounter. Carol? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. You mean my wife? She left about 15 minutes ago. I'm her husband. Is there a problem? As soon as I said that, something in her broke. Her shoulders sagged, and her face crumpled as tears welled up in her eyes. She started trembling, and before I could even think, she began to cry. It wasn't just quiet tears either. Her whole body shook, and her sobs came out in jagged gasps. I didn't know what to do. The sight of someone breaking down like that, on my doorstep no less, tugged at something in me. Whatever was going on, this woman clearly needed help. Hey, I said softly. Come inside. You look like you need to sit down. She hesitated, her tear-streaked face staring at me like she wasn't sure if she could trust me. But then, she gave a small nod, and I stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. I guided her to the kitchen and pulled out a chair for her at the table. Sit here. I'll make you some coffee. As I moved around the kitchen, grabbing a mug and putting on the kettle, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She sat hunched over, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd fished out of her purse. Her breathing was still uneven, but the sobbing had started to quiet. Once the coffee was ready, I placed it in front of her and sat across from her. Here, I said gently. Take your time. She picked up the cup with trembling hands and took a sip. The warmth seemed to help. Her breathing slowed, and some color returned to her cheeks. My name is Elizabeth, she said finally, her voice soft and shaky. Elizabeth, I repeated, leaning forward slightly. Okay, so, what's going on? You said you were looking for my wife. Is there some kind of problem? She nodded, but her words seemed to catch in her throat. Her hand went to her temple, massaging it like she was trying to force herself to think. I wanted to talk to her, she stammered. But now I don't know if I should have come here. I kept my voice calm. Look, whatever it is, you're clearly upset. If you're having a problem with Carol, maybe I can help. Just start from the beginning. Take it slow. Elizabeth sipped her coffee, her grip on the cup tightening. She looked at me, her eyes filled with an unsettling mix of fear and guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've been so nervous. My whole system is shot, and I probably seem crazy to you." I shook my head. "You seem like someone who's going through something hard. Just take your time. I'm listening." She nodded, but for a moment she just sat there, her gaze fixed on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's about your wife," she said. My chest tightened, a sudden overwhelming feeling of dread washing over me. "What about her?" Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. Elizabeth took a long, shaky breath, her hands tightening around the coffee mug. "I wanted to take revenge on your wife," she admitted, her voice raw. "I thought I'd find her here and give her a good beating. I even thought about using the pepper spray." She gestured toward her purse. "I was so angry, so hurt, but I realize now how close I came to making a huge mistake. Maybe God stopped me from doing something I'd regret." I sat frozen, her words reverberating in my head. "Why?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What happened between you and my wife that would make you want to do something so drastic?" Elizabeth hesitated, her face crumpling. She glanced at me with a mixture of shame and despair. "I don't even know where to start," she said. "You seem like a kind man, and to tell you the truth, I'm ashamed to even share this with you." I forced a small, reassuring smile, though inside I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "Elizabeth, whatever it is, I need to know the truth. If it involves my wife, it involves me too. Please, just tell me." For a moment she stared at me, her eyes searching mine. Then she nodded, as if convincing herself that she had no choice. "The thing is," she began, her voice trembling, "your wife Carol is dating my husband." Her words hit me like a freight train. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my mind racing to keep up. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hollow. "Can you repeat that?" Elizabeth nodded slowly, her lips pressing together in a grim line. "Your wife and my husband, Thomas. They've been seeing each other. I have proof." I leaned back in my chair, struggling to process what I was hearing. This couldn't be real. Not Carol. Not after everything we'd been through. "My husband is a professor," Elizabeth continued, her words spilling out faster now, as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. "He teaches at another college. I've suspected him for months, but I couldn't find any real evidence. Just little things, you know? Late nights, unexplained expenses. But then I finally caught him." She glanced down, her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. "I installed a hidden camera in our home. I didn't want to, but I was desperate to know the truth, and that's how I found out." "Found out what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That he brought Carol to our house," she said, her voice cracking. "While I was out, he brought your wife into my home. And that's not all. I checked our bank statements, and there were charges for things he couldn't explain. An apartment rental, a hotel room. When I confronted him, he denied it all, said it was for work or meetings. But I knew, and when I saw the video," she trailed off, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. I felt like my chest was about to burst. My mind was screaming, but outwardly, I managed to keep my composure. "Elizabeth," I said carefully, "do you still have the video?" She nodded, sniffling. "Yes. I thought you might want to see it. I know this is a lot to take in, but I swear to you, I'm not lying." I didn't respond right away. My thoughts were a hurricane, but on the outside, I kept my voice calm. "Okay, let me see it." Elizabeth hesitated, searching my face, then reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it and scrolled through her gallery. "Here," she said, sliding the phone across the table. I took it, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. On the screen was a video, the timestamp showing it had been recorded just a week ago. I hesitated, staring at the play button, knowing that once I pressed it, there would be no turning back. And then, with a deep breath, I tapped the screen. The video started grainy but clear enough. It was a wide shot of a living room. Elizabeth's living room, I assumed. At first, there was nothing, just an empty room. Then, a man entered the frame. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked about my age. He walked in confidently, glancing behind him. And then she followed. Carol. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. There was no mistaking her. The way she carried herself, the way she smiled. It was my wife. In the video, Thomas leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick kiss between friends, but an intimate kiss. They sat on the couch together, laughing, talking, oblivious to the camera that had captured everything. I couldn't watch anymore. I handed the phone back to Elizabeth, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Are you okay?" she asked cautiously, her voice soft. I didn't know how to answer her. My mind was a mess of emotions, shock, rage, heartbreak, humiliation. But more than anything, I felt an overwhelming need for answers. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Elizabeth nodded sympathetically. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve to know." I sat back in my chair, staring at the table. My world, the one I thought I knew, had just shattered into pieces. I sat in stunned silence, Elizabeth's words echoing in my head. How had I missed it? Every late night Carol claimed was a work meeting, every sudden change in her mood, every outfit that seemed out of character. It all made sense now. The signs had been there, clear as day, but I had turned a blind eye, unwilling to believe that the woman I had loved and supported for 2 decades could betray me like this. As Elizabeth spoke about how she had been following Thomas, her voice rising with frustration and anger, my thoughts were elsewhere. I felt like I was looking at my life from the outside, watching it unravel one thread at a time. "I'm done being his doormat," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want everyone to know what he's done. I want people to see who he really is. Not just me, but Carol too. I'm ready to take this public." I looked at her, the rawness of her pain mirrored in my own heart. "And how do you plan to do that?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with her coffee mug. "That's the problem," she admitted. "I'm stuck. Thomas and I have had our share of fights, big ones. After the last one, he decided to teach me a lesson. He cut me off from the accounts. I've been out of work for 6 months, and now I can't even afford to hire a lawyer." The desperation in her voice was palpable. "I tried getting a loan," she continued, "but my credit's a mess, and no one will approve me. I'm stuck. I want to fight him, but I don't have the resources. And honestly, I don't know where to start." Her honesty struck a chord in me. Elizabeth wasn't just someone scorned. She was trapped, fighting a losing battle with no way out. I thought about everything I had built, my bakeries, my savings, my ability to act where she couldn't. A plan started to form in my mind. "Elizabeth," I said carefully, "what if I help you?" She looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, keeping my tone steady. "You've already given me the proof I need to end my marriage. That video, it's enough to make sure Carol can't lie her way out of this. But I want you to give me the original recording too. In exchange, I'll make sure we both come out of this stronger. I'll consult with my lawyer, not just about my divorce, but yours as well. We'll handle both of them." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that? But why?" "Because we're in this together now," I said simply. "Your husband betrayed you. My wife betrayed me. This isn't just about exposing them. It's about protecting ourselves and getting justice. You need a lawyer, and I can pay for one. Consider it a loan. You can pay me back later." Elizabeth stared at me, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "But what about Carol? Aren't you worried about making things worse?" "I've already decided what I'm going to do," I said firmly. "No big scenes, no shouting matches. I'll meet with the lawyer, get everything in order and file the papers. Carol will find out when she's served. Quiet, clean, and unarguable. And I suggest you do the same with Thomas. If we play this smart, we'll come out ahead." Elizabeth nodded slowly, her composure starting to return. "Okay," she said softly. If you're serious, I'll give you the original video, and I won't do anything drastic, at least not until we've spoken to the lawyer. Good, I said. We'll exchange contacts. I'll keep you updated on everything, and we'll take it step by step. We spent the next few minutes exchanging information. Before she left, I reassured her one last time. You're not alone in this anymore, I said. We'll figure it out. Once Elizabeth was gone, the house felt unbearably quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in my hand. Every fiber of my being screamed for confrontation, to call Carol and demand answers, to lay everything out in front of her and see the look on her face. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I met with a lawyer the very next day. I explained the situation in detail. Carol's affair, Elizabeth's predicament, the video evidence. The lawyer, a sharp man named Mark, assured me that the case for divorce was solid. I asked him to take on Elizabeth's case as well, paying for his services up front. She's in a difficult position, I told him, but she deserves a fair fight. Mark agreed, and with that, the wheels were set in motion. Divorce papers were drawn up for both me and Elizabeth. A week later, I met with Elizabeth again to give her an update. She was grateful, but I could tell she was still struggling. She mentioned her financial situation again, and that's when another idea struck me. Elizabeth, I said, I have an opening at one of my bakeries. It's nothing fancy, but it's a steady paycheck. You'd be able to save some money and pay me back for the lawyer if that's what you want. What do you think? Her eyes lit up, and for the first time, I saw a spark of hope in her. I'd love that, she said. Thank you, Owen. Really? It's the least I can do, I replied. As I drove home that evening, I felt the faintest sense of relief. When the divorce papers were ready, I knew exactly how I wanted to proceed. I didn't want Carol to find out from a stranger, nor did I want to create a public scene. This was something I needed to face head on. It was a Thursday evening when I finally had the opportunity. Carol came home later than usual, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked in. She placed her bag on the counter, letting out a sigh. Normally, I might have asked why she was late. Not tonight. I was sitting at the dining table, the papers neatly stacked in front of me. Carol, I said, my voice calm but firm. She turned, her expression shifting as she took in my serious tone. What's wrong? She asked, her brow furrowing. I held up the divorce papers, letting the weight of the moment settle in the air. These are for you, I said. They're divorce papers. I know about your affair with Thomas. Her face went pale, and for a split second, I saw genuine shock flash in her eyes. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Her denial quickly shifted into an attack. You know what? If something did happen, and I'm not saying it did, it would be your fault anyway, she snapped. I raised an eyebrow, leaning back in my chair. My fault? Go on, Carol. I'm curious to hear this. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You never pay attention to me anymore, Owen. You're always working, always at the bakeries. When was the last time we went on a real date? When was the last time you looked at me like I was more than just part of the furniture? So you cheated to fix our marriage? I asked, incredulous. Her face twisted, and she hesitated for a moment before changing tactics. It wasn't even a real affair, she said, her voice rising. It was just something to stir things up, to make you notice me again. That's all it was. I met Thomas at a conference, and he was so lively, so full of energy. I wanted to tease you, to get you to wake up. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped me. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was bitter, almost hollow. Carol, you're a brilliant woman, I said. But you're telling me this story like you're a teenager, caught between two boys at a high school dance. Do you realize how absurd you sound right now? She flinched, the cracks in her resolve showing. I'm serious, Owen, she said, her voice trembling. It was just a stupid fling. It didn't mean anything. I was bored. We've achieved so much together, but it's like we've hit a wall. Everything felt so predictable. I shook my head slowly, the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. Predictable? I repeated. So instead of talking to me, instead of telling me you felt that way, you decided the best solution was to sleep with another man? And you thought that would fix us? It wasn't like that, she cried, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't want it to go this far. I thought— You thought what, Carol? I interrupted. That I wouldn't find out? That I'd just keep walking around in the dark while you played whatever game this was? She froze, her lips trembling as she struggled to find an answer. Then she tried a different approach. Owen, she said softly, her voice breaking, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. It wasn't cheating. It was a way to get your attention. My stomach churned at her words. Carol, I said, my voice sharp, don't insult me. I've seen the video. Her face drained of color completely. What video? It doesn't matter now. You'll find out later which one, I said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. The one where you're not just kissing Thomas, but also everything else. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. I leaned forward, my voice cold. I didn't watch that part, by the way. I don't need to. The little I did see was enough. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to stammer out a response. Owen, save it, I said, cutting her off. This conversation is over. I've already made up my mind. You can keep trying to justify it to yourself, but it won't change anything. I deserve better than this. Better than you. Carol broke down, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I stood, grabbing my jacket. The papers are on the table. You can sign them or let the lawyers handle it. Either way, we're done. Without another word, I walked out of the house, leaving her to deal with the wreckage she had created. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a haze. My days were filled with meetings with my lawyer, finalizing details, and mentally preparing myself for what lay ahead. Our trial took place almost simultaneously with Elizabeth's. It was a logistical challenge for our lawyer, Mark, who had to juggle both cases. But if anyone could pull it off, it was him. He handled each detail with precision, ensuring that both Elizabeth and I walked into those courtrooms with confidence. Carol and I divided our property as expected, with one significant exception, the house. That was non-negotiable for me. I had built so much of my life around it. Every corner of that place held memories, good and bad. I'd poured my soul into making it a home, and I wasn't about to let it go. Thankfully, Mark struck a deal that allowed me to keep it. Carol seemed too exhausted to fight much by then. The fire that had once defined her spirit was now reduced to flickers. When the gavel finally came down, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. We were officially divorced. I wasn't naive enough to think the pain would disappear overnight, but at least this chapter was closed. The hardest part of it all was explaining the truth to Sarah and William. They supported me, but the news still shook them. Carol had been their mother for decades, and even though they saw the cracks in her actions, their bond with her wasn't something that could be severed. They continued to speak with her, but the warmth was gone, replaced with something colder, more distant. Carol moved into a small apartment across town, left to face the consequences of her choices. Elizabeth's trial unfolded smoothly as well. Thomas, arrogant and dismissive, had tried to fight her claims, but the evidence was damning. The video, the financial records, and the testimony of others painted a clear picture of his betrayal. In the end, Elizabeth walked away with her rightful share of their assets. Justice was served, and it didn't take long for another bombshell to drop. Thomas had another mistress. Carol, the woman he had so passionately pursued, became just another discarded piece in his game. After the divorce, he severed ties with her entirely. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was a different woman. Freed from the weight of her toxic marriage, she began to thrive. She continued working at one of my bakeries, and I saw something in her, resilience, a quiet strength that had been buried for far too long. Over time, she proved herself indispensable. Her work ethic, attention to detail, and ability to connect with both customers and employees set her apart. I promoted her, and she flourished in her new role. Watching her grow was a reminder of what people are capable of when given the chance to heal. As for me, recovery has been slow. The betrayal cut deep, and the scars are still there, but I've come to terms with the lessons it taught me. Trust is vital in any relationship, but it can't be blind. I've learned to look past the surface, to notice the small shifts before they become storms. And perhaps most importantly, I've realized that when trust is broken, it's better to confront the truth than to live in denial or cling to something irreparably damaged. There's peace in knowing I did what was right, for myself, for my family, and even for Elizabeth. Life isn't perfect, but it's moving forward, one day at a time. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.